I understand you're working on a book at the moment, Who Killed the Company Spirit? Can you just explain a bit about what you mean by the company spirit?
Well, it's culture. It's essentially the DNA of a company, and it's that sense of who are we, what do we believe in, what our sense of purpose is, what our beliefs, what our values are, and the who kills the company spirit is really comes from the idea that what often happens, or what seems to be happening in businesses, is the very opposite of that. Indeed, you end up with toxic cultures that people find quite difficult to work within because of the way the organisations are led. And if that toxicity, breeds and extends through to how people are treated and how they work and what they do, then that tends to ultimately translate out to how the customers feel about that business.
And so you talk about toxicity on the inside of the business.
Well, yes, because people go to work, don't they? They go to work, and most people want to go to work to yes, obviously everybody wants to needs to earn money, but actually most people want to work for an organisation that they believe in. And if it's the opposite of that, well, quite often, if they can, people will just go because they'll think, well, I can't stand that anymore. It just doesn't feel comfortable anymore. I don't like going to work, and if I don't like going to work, then what's the point? I'll just go somewhere else. So you see it. You see it. You see it sadly in terms of the. Of when a company has gone wrong, even gone bust, and you talk to people about what it was like to work there, and people would just talk about, it was horrible. Nobody knew what they were doing. The boss didn't. Everybody shouted at one another. It was just, the whole experience was just horrible.
Documentaries on Sports Direct spring to mind.
Well, interesting, I've never met him. I probably, not that I've met this chap, but I'm probably more comfortable with the kind of Philip Green analogy, because there's absolutely clear from everything that you read and there's only one winner in a Philip Green company, and it's Philip Green. He doesn't care about this, and that's his decision. He's built a multi-billion-pound organisation off on being largely, how do I get rich? And I just feel, thankfully, that organisations and people like that are really being found out nowadays, and people are starting, both employees and customers, start to vote with their feet.
Some relationship between the idea of company spirit and brand personality, because I know you came from a branding, advertising world background. Is there a relationship between the two?
That there is, but for me, the company spirit is always at the top, and the company spirit is the philosophy really that actually helps the company by getting clear in what it stands for overall. That can then translate into the brand strategy and the brand positioning. And we've joked about this before, is one of the interesting things I find is that marketing people really struggle with this, because they see the world of the brand, or the world of what they do, through very much brand comms world, whereas what I'm talking about is something much deeper. It's really to do with the absolute fundamental, what makes the company different, and the culture that sits alongside that.
The values have got to be rooted in the story of the company, is that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And stories are what businesses are about. And every company, every person, every individual, they have a story, and that's the good and the bad. And one of the things one of the phrases I use with my clients is, you can't rewrite history. You have to understand it, and you have to understand where you've come from. And if you do that, then that's what gives you that authenticity, that actually gives you something solid to work from, because it's come out of what's happened.
At the same time, you need to make sure that that authenticity, if it's rooted in the past, is also still relevant today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of my other little catchphrases that go along with you can't rewrite history, is by understanding how you behaved when you're at your best. Then you need to actually make sure that is modern and relevant for today's needs. But by getting that balance of thinking through, okay, this is how we did behave, or this is how we have behaved when we have been at our best. And that doesn't mean it's a history story. It's about saying, actually, when we behave in this way and we do these things in the right way, then that's when we've succeeded. So how do we then do that within the challenges of 2018, 2019?
So the values in themselves actually can stay the same, but it's the way they're expressed which changes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's where too many companies go wrong, and too many CEOs, they just outsource the values to somebody else. So they'll say, oh, not sure what we're doing here. So, I'm new, and the best thing to do is we'll get somebody in and tell us what our values should be, which I just don't think works.
So companies that have been around for quite a long time, do they kind of just lose sight of their values at some point?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's because it's a challenge, because the challenge is unless you've got a CEO who believes in the importance of the culture, then often the values get disconnected from the way the business is run, and that's where perhaps one of the biggest challenges is obviously if you have got a long established company, a company that has got long roots. I mean, as you're talking, or as the question came out, made me think of work I did many years ago with Robert Bosch, and a really interesting organisation, because the founder, long dead. I mean, we're talking somebody who died 60, 70, 80 years ago, but actually had really, really clear values in terms of the way he behaved and the way he set up his company. And 50 years after his death, I mean, largely that business had forgotten about the human side of the way he operated. They'd fallen back on the obvious bit, the product bit, the tangible bit, the what we make bit, but had completely forgotten how he wrapped the company in a true, in my language, spirit.
That's interesting, because earlier today we were listening to Chris Humphreys, former director of Disney Corporation, talking about the way in which Walt Disney in the 1950s actually codified effectively the values in order to preserve the legacy of his vision. What you've just suggested is that had Bosch maybe done the same, the values may have lasted longer and not been lost sight of.
It's interesting because I cite Disney as a really good example of a company that is forever living or losing its company spirit. Now I've never worked for Disney or with Disney, so I never know whether this is absolutely right or not. I just go on what you see and what you hear. But for me, and one of the examples I use is the moment Walt Disney died. They sort of tore up the values. Or they seem to have torn up the values, and then that didn't work. And a few years later, you get a CEO comes in and says, actually, we need to get back to what Disney was all about. And then I don't know whether your chat, Chris, spoke about it, but there was a famous situation. I think it must be 10 years ago now, where Roy Disney, I think, was one of the last members of the Disney family on the board. He forced the board to effectively buy back their roots. And what he did was get the business to, in my understanding, was get the business to buy back Pixar. Because what had happened is they'd outsourced the very engine room of Disney, which was creativity and animation and innovation, to somebody else. And turned Disney into a distribution company rather than a creative company. And of course, then that had a huge effect on the employees. And this is the thing that I find, this is the thing I find CEOs forget about, or the leadership teams, is they think, okay, we'll do that, or we'll go over there, and not thinking about, well, actually, for an employee who believes in what the company stands for, suddenly to go somewhere different, or in a different space or a different strategy, then how does that affect you in terms of how you think about the company you work for?
Okay, so it's interesting you say about using the history of the company as a way of looking at the roots and where the values and so on come from, in order to retain the company spirit, I guess. And it's a way of actually restoring the company spirit when something's gone wrong. Anthony Jenkins actually at Barclays tried to do exactly that by looking at the Quaker values of the origin of the business in order to restore the culture of Barclays after the problems that Barclays faced. His example shows that it doesn't always work, because unless you've got the buy-in of the board with that strategy, one individual taking that approach isn't going to make it. How do you get the board to buy into that idea?
I think they either believe in it or not. That's one of my learnings, and it's been interesting for me when I've met board members as well as the leadership team, because they either get this and they think it's important, or they don't. It's almost impossible to convert one to the other.
And is it generally the board that gets it first, or is it the CEO that introduces the idea to the board?
It's normally the CEO, but I think you're right, and obviously I don't know the Barclays situation, but I think the challenge, and I must admit I had it with a client that was actually another bank, but in Sweden, where actually the leadership team were absolutely clear about what the company spirit was and the changes that need to happen in order to, interestingly, go back to the point you made, which was how do we take our values and make them modern and relevant. So they were going through we know what our values are, we know what we stand for, but how do we make them modern and relevant for the needs of today? And actually that took them into battle with the board,
yeah.
who were struggling with what they were trying to do. And indeed in that particular case it meant the resignation of the CEO. So that was quite a dramatic example. I had an example earlier on this year where I was working with both the leadership team and the board, and that worked really well because they were experiencing something together and they were trying to create something together. And at the end of the day, the company spirit is about heart first, head second. And unless you get that understanding and that sense of what it means and what we're really trying to do through an experiential way and through a creative way, then people struggle.
I guess it's a case of it gets lost in translation.
It gets lost in translation, and people, if they're not there from the beginning at a senior level, then I think they have difficulty understanding the journey the people are on, and they just see it as some sort of exercise. They see it as some sort of, oh well, let's do culture on a Friday afternoon because we know we've got to do culture. And at its worst, in fact, I was talking to somebody earlier in this week, and I was describing. He was talking about his board, and he was, and I was joking with him because I was saying, oh, I'm sure one of them thinks that culture is having a pizza. And he said, well, actually, funny you should say that, because his view, that the board director's view of culture is, well, yes, we'll do something and then we'll go for a beer, and that's doing culture. And it's not. It's not at all. It's actually the heartbeat of an organisation.
What would be interesting is to understand if there are any particular triggers that, or what are the usual reasons why a company loses its spirit?
Normally, when private equity gets in the way, and the focus of the business becomes dominated by money and the bottom line, rather than how do we what do we stand for, what makes us different, and if we do that in the correct way, we'll make the bottom line.
Well, that would equally apply to an organisation that was focused on trying to serve the markets, not just private equity, I guess.
Yeah. I think it popped into my head because 3 years ago, it was just a run of about 4 of my clients had all been involved in a similar situation where the company itself had a strong spirit, private equity got involved, and 2-3 years after that, it had got lost because there's no desire to look after the spirit.
So is it linked directly to a loss of sense of what the purpose is?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's something that again, this is one of the reasons why CEOs can struggle with this, because sense of purpose all sounds jolly woolly and intangible and fluffy, doesn't that? That's as one of my good CEOs said to me. Well, good CEO is the wrong phrase, but a friendly CEO that I've worked with a couple of times. She'd always say, well, this isn't fluffy HR bollocks, this is actually serious, this is actually fundamental to the success of the business. And she was absolutely right, because she absolutely understood its value in how to ultimately hit the bottom line and hit the numbers. Because if you start in the right place, which is get clear about who you are, what you stand for, and what makes you different, and do it in a way that your employees feel involved and engaged with, so they start to have a more memorable employee experience. They love the company they work for, start to love the company they work for. Get that right, and actually that spills on to the outside, and customers feel that energy and belief, and they start to feel love for that company. So
is also the real danger point when the founder steps out of the business?
It really is, because quite often they don't write anything down.
Yeah.
and because their view is, and quite naturally to a degree, well, it's in my head or her head, and actually, if you're talking something that is a balance between tangible and intangible, that actually sums up the spirit of a company, then actually, if you haven't got it in a very clear way as to what that really means and what that looks like, then actually it often does literally die with the founder going.
But it goes beyond the idea of just having a vision about what the business is. It's about how we achieve that vision.
Exactly.
And who we're creating value for, I presume.
Exactly. And one of my phrases I use a lot is the answer's in the company spirit, because if you understand what your company is trying to do and how it needs to behave, then that should drive everything from how you talk to your employees, what products you develop, what customers you're looking for, and fundamentally the behaviour of the organisation.
But not all founders either are very good at evolving the story.
No, no, and founders are interesting people, because it's pretty tough for creating a successful company, and obviously I like a huge number of other people, so I won't claim ownership. I've got a huge respect for the late Steve Jobs, and as we all know, or anybody that was close to him, he wasn't easy, because he had a clear sense of this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to do, and if you don't believe in it, then go.
I guess an interesting current example is whether or not the Virgin brand, post Richard Branson, is going to actually lose its spirit.
Well, I'm sure it will to a degree, and I think it depends what legacy is left, because it is one of the challenges for any incoming CEO of an organisation. It's always interesting to see where they start. Do they start with, let's hire McKinsey and bring in somebody to do some strategy document for us, or a strategy overview, or do they start with, actually, No, let's start with really understanding the culture of the company, and using that as their vehicle for driving it forward.
Do you think a new CEO should actually start by understanding what legacy they want to leave? Because it seems to me that most people start to think about their legacy towards their later years rather than at the beginning.
Well, I think you're right, but I think what is important is, perhaps a better way of describing it is just getting to know your company, and getting to know your company. It's like, it's no different from people. As you get to know somebody, you sort of delve more and more into their past because you want to know their story. And if you like that story, and if it gets into sort of getting together type relationships, then absolutely you start to buy into what made that person tick, or understand what made that person tick. And it's exactly the same with a company. And that's why, by taking the time to actually understand its story, warts and all, you start to understand it.
It's interesting. You say that CEOs can have a scared reaction to the idea of spirit. I imagine they probably have a quite scared reaction to the other concept that you've talked about before, which is the business case for love. It's not very often that you hear the word business and love in the same sentence.
Yes, and I do that deliberately, and because it is a juxtaposition. And I suppose what I've found is that the CEOs who are much more open to thinking about that, or indeed embracing that idea, they themselves are defined by an attitude, and they tend to be three things that define them. First is they're curious, and curiosity is all about being open-minded, and actually looking and be prepared to think about different things. And I'm staggered at how many CEOs get to a place of running a company, and actually they close down. They stop being curious, if they ever were curious, and actually sort of batten down the hatches into the world that they know and understand. So the people who best buy into probably is the wrong phrase, but understand at the beginning the concept of love within business, they tend to be curious. They tend to be curious and open-minded.
There's a link here as well, I think, isn't there? Because the founder is going to love the business because it was their idea.
Yeah. Well, and that's what so often goes wrong with a business when it loses that love, is the passion goes. You know, the passion, the excitement, the energy, the creativity, the waking up and getting up in the morning and saying, actually, we're going to do this today because that drives so many people.
But you kind of have to define it in order to be able to hire other people that are going to love the business in the future.
Yes, and again, my belief is that just like love, actually, the clearer you are about who you are and what you stand for, then you tend to attract people who buy into those similar values and similar behaviours. And again, a byproduct of this is the clearer you are about what you are as a company, then surprise, surprise, it's easier to recruit if you recruit for fit rather than just job spec or skills, because you're looking for a certain type of person to actually buy into those values and live those values in the way they work.
And the articulation of all of that is absolutely key to establishing reputation.
And one of the good things that have happened, arguably for me, over the last 10 years is that reputation or bad behaviour is quite often on the front page, not the business pages. And therefore, more and more, it's very difficult not to make the link. Even the most hard-nosed financial director struggles to put their proverbial head in the sand and not understand the link between how a company behaves, its reputation, good or bad, and financial results.
In terms of reputation, you've talked about the people who are founders often, well, they love the business themselves, but they're actually passionate about wanting their customers to love the business too and be able to, I think you use the phrase, brag about it.
Yes, and again, it's a mindset, and one of the things I find that's incredibly important. All these subjects we're talking about, for me, resonate more now than they ever did, and with so many challenges going on, and such a lack of belief in what our politicians say, who, frankly, constantly lie through their teeth, through how some of the big institutions behave. This week, business people, CEOs, get rewarded for failure. So Mr. Pester, £1.7 million leaving for creating the most miserable customer experience ever for his TSP customers. Therefore, is it any wonder that a lot of people look at business and think, well, hang on a minute, what's going on? And therefore, one of the things that has become increasingly important in all of this, where this lack of trust is sitting, is that most people, most employees, they want their company to have a sense of purpose. They want their company to have some ethics, some values, and some beliefs. And the bragging about it comes down to the bragging about it starts with the employees. They want to go down to the pub on a Friday night and actually talk with pride about what their company does. They don't want it appearing, or their CEO appearing on News at 10 or BBC, and actually in the dock, the proverbial dock, for bad behaviour.
And they want the customers to want to brag about being customers as well. Yeah?
And if you get the bragging, if the bragging happens internally, it tends to happen externally. And we all, we live with it constantly. The fact that good and bad is so easily commented on in social media that when something does go well and people like it, then almost the first thing they do now is put it on Instagram or put it on Twitter and they do brag about it because they feel that they're being loved in their own way.
I heard the phrase the other day about being Instagrammable.
Well, I think it's true. I think it's true in as much as that we have a very quick reaction to stuff, and I think we can. It's like walking in here today. You get a feel about a place. You can tell sort of immediately how it is, and that's what happens when we go shopping. You walk into a place and you don't need a PowerPoint presentation by the owner or by the company to explain how you feel. You feel it instantly. Do the people in the place? Do the employees feel? Do they know what they're talking about? Do they understand their product? Does it feel good? Is it a fun place to be? Do they listen to the customer? And I think that's where the concepts of the customer experience is a mindset. And forgive me, but I think so often the phrase customer experience gets confused with customer service, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this mindset of saying, actually, if we start with getting clear about what is the customer experience we're trying to create and work backwards to the product, it's a very different way of thinking. Whereas so many other businesses, they're trapped in this, here's our product, how are we going to sell it mentality.
It sounds like to these days many organisations have actually got confused between the means and the ends. So profitability is the outcome of doing the right thing.
Exactly.
But they're focusing on profitability, therefore they forget to give enough attention to the means. Yeah. Exactly,
and I think business is hugely guilty of short-termism, and going back to Disney. I mean, it's most of these companies, most of these businesses that have succeeded, it hasn't been plain sailing, and they've made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
And the issues that we've talked about so far, are they more prevalent or less in certain industries?
No, or in my opinion, it's just completely down to leadership. It's completely down to, does the leader get this? Do they understand the importance of it? Do they believe in it? And that's been one of the joys of my business, is actually I've worked in a huge number of different categories and a huge number of different countries, and for me it's the same mentality.
So even in an industry, for example, banking, that's been accused of being focused on profit maximisation, cost reduction, and so on, there are examples that would be outliers. So you can choose. It's about choice of business model, really. Yeah.
It is. It is, and it's which is one of the reasons why I focus on the word behaviour rather than strategy, because it is a choice. It's how do we want this company to behave, and where do we start, and do we believe in this as an approach or not? And going back to the question you asked about the business case for love, it is polarizing by definition. I've had some very short new business conversations simply because it's obvious that I'm talking Chinese and they're talking something else.
I guess it was less relevant in the past in some senses where the business model was more transactional, but these days most businesses are service-led businesses, and therefore it's more potent as a problem to be solved if you lose the company spirit.
I'm not sure it's to do with transaction. I think it's more to do with the fact that most people, and this is one of the good things about, or one of the interesting things, is the vast majority of certainly younger people, they think about work in a slightly different way, and obviously gone are the days, and really probably it's my generation that was the last of this, where you literally your parents want you to go into something and hopefully you'll be there forever, because that's nice and safe. The 20-year-olds, they think about things in a very different way, but when they are attached to something, when they are working for something, where they are in it, they want to be in it, and they want to feel that there is an ethos that they can relate to, that they feel part of a community and they feel empathetic with it.
So passion drives the company spirit, or disengagement from it?
Yes, and goes back to the easiest way you can find that is when you walk, is when you experience it. You walk on a plane. When was the last time you walked onto a British Airways plane and you thought, this is going to be a great experience? Because of the way the staff are, because of what Willie Walsh does, and the behaviour the way that culture operates, and that doesn't mean to say there aren't some very good people there, and every so often you get somebody who is absolutely brilliant and can make a real difference, but it's because they're doing it for themselves rather than because that's what they believe in.
And do the points you're making relate equally to business or business to consumer?
Well, interestingly, they do, because. And this company I've been working with in Sweden for the last 3 or 4 years is a business-to-business company, or it started off as a business-to-business company, the division I started with. But the guy who, when I first met, he basically fundamentally understood what I was talking about. And I suppose going back to the sort of buy-in or not about the business case for love, one of the things I found is that normally the CEO has already made a decision that this is what they want to do. They're just looking for help in order to get there. So something perhaps has already triggered that desire to actually think, we need to think about this, and they're just looking for a way of doing it where they feel that actually what they have in their minds can be brought to life.
Well, I guess every CEO is also a customer, and they experience good and bad customer experience, and so they must be relating that to their own business in some way.
Well, interesting you say that, Paul, because one of my ways of getting people to think a little bit differently is literally that, which is you take your job hat off and put your customer hat on, and actually go and experience things. And even one step removed from that, when you get people to talk about experiences they love. Why do they spend their money and where? Suddenly they can articulate very quickly, oh, well, I love going to that restaurant because of X, Y, and Z, or that actually is my favourite, I love my favourite football team because of these reasons, or actually, if I am travelling, then this is my preferred airline because of these reasons. People articulate that incredibly quickly, and then struggle to actually articulate it about their own company.
At the moment, there's a lot of talk about the importance of customer experience, but clearly customers value the experience, but they're also looking for other types of value when they're buying a product, buying a service. They want quality, design, and various other aspects of it.
Yeah.
So you need, you can't forget the other dimensions of value as part of the proposition. You've got to look at the whole customer value proposition.
Well, interesting you say that, Paul, because one of the things I'm going to share is what I call the love grid, and it's at the conference that's coming up in November, and for me it's a very quick way of actually showing the link between the internal company behaviour, which is largely driven by the bosses, and the external customer experience and the customer relationship, and there are three different behaviours as I see them, and down at the bottom, what I call dealer behaviour tends to be where companies just focus on product and price, and if they do that and that's all they really think about, that what tends to happen is the experience that a customer or how the customer experiences that company is really no more than okay, and it feels very transactional. I go, I buy, I leave. And then the second tier is what I call retailer behaviour, which isn't just about shops; it's more about a mentality. And these businesses, they tend to add to the product and price bit, i.e., what you're talking about, some sort of service philosophy. But the way they do it for me is in a very head-led way. They do it in a sort of very management consultancy way, and therefore the service comes across as a bit just robotic, but the top, what I call brand behaviour, these companies just go a different way, and they really balance the product, the price, the service, if you like, the business fundamentals with so the head bit with the heart bit, and the heart bit is the company spirit. The heart bit is the values, the sense of purpose, and the beliefs, and those companies know, and perhaps this is the other point of difference that I make and believe in, that if they do that in the right way, the first thing that will become memorable is the experience for their employees, and because their employees will believe in something, and will come across or come at it from a perspective of feeling really engaged in what they're doing. And start to, and I know it's a strong word, love what they do and love the company. And it comes back to, once you get that bit right, so on the outside, the customer experience for these type of companies, the experience tends to be memorable and the relationship is based on love.
Okay, and can you design the systems and things to actually deliver what you're describing? Because it sounds like the company spirit and creating love doesn't sound like something you can really design and control effectively, and managers like to feel they can design and control everything.
Well, and I think that's the challenge. Yeah, I think that's the challenge because love as a construct is that base human emotion. And as we all know, love is difficult to be, you can't put it in a box.
So it's got to come from empathy with the customer, with the employees?
Well, it's interesting you use the word empathy, because that's the second of the behavioural attitudes that I see are the CEOs that best get this. So you're going back, one is curiosity, and the other is empathy. The third one, interestingly, and this is what balances off, is clarity. There is that sense of they want clarity, and they want to get clear. And again, this is what I see from employees I work with. They tend to want two things from their bosses, and one of them is clarity. Tell me the numbers. Tell me what the goals are. Tell me what the objectives are. We want to know. But the other thing that people want is they want to feel that sense of engagement. They want to feel that they are collaborating in bringing that goal to life. Gone are the days. Well, it's still there, but I can't. It's no longer. It doesn't seem to be a successful strategy anymore. Gone are the days when you can just tell somebody to do something.
Yeah.
Or tell a company to do something.
Okay, so my final question really is, if you're a CEO or a board and you feel that the company is starting to lose its spirit, what would be the first thing you would recommend somebody to do to avoid that problem?
Well, go back to the beginning. Go back to the roots and actually get an understanding of how are we behaving now versus how are we behaving when we've been at our best, and then to understand why that's going on, what the gaps are, what's sort of taken over to actually create that feeling, and fix it.
Can you think of an example of a business at the moment that you think is losing its spirit and ought to be revisiting its past?
Well, government.
Yeah, well, government's not a business, but I get the point.
Government's an institution.
Yeah.
Let's leave government and politics out of it. But I think I think Toys R Us, that type of organisation, is what happens when you end up in the opposite to the customer experience. You end up with no customer experience, and no customer experience.
No customers.
Tends to equal no customers, and therefore ... no business. Because actually, what tends to happen is along the line, and as always, the interesting things, if you go back into Toys R Us, there was a spirit, there was an energy, there was a sense of us doing something different when they were at their best. And then they just lose it, and then suddenly, when all you're doing is looking at the numbers, the whole energy is drained, and the last thing people think about is the customer experience. They just think about, are we going to make today's numbers?
So Peter Drucker was right when he said the only purpose of a business is to earn and keep a customer, but businesses forget how to earn and keep a customer.
Well, let's just take the most relevant, or one of the biggest stories of the week, if you leave Brexit out of it for a moment, which is TSB. And this is the perfect example of a business. Paul Pester might be a jolly nice man. He's a jolly rich man now, but he clearly, when he was embarking on trying to modernise the TSB, completely forgot. He didn't think about it from the perspective of the customer experience. His start point, one has to assume, was we need a new IT system. Let's do it, and let's try and do it as cheaply as possible. And of course, what happens is, as we all know, the net effect of that behaviour is an absolute disaster in terms of customer experience, and an absolute disaster in terms of reputation. And it will take many, 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 many years for anybody. Why on earth would you want to go? Why on earth would you bank with the TSB? Mm-hmm. There is no point.
Those kind of decisions can actually just threaten the survival altogether. Yeah.
Well, and again, it does help me, and I'm not. I wouldn't want this to happen in this dramatic way, because it affected so many lives. But it's like when BP happened, and back in, gosh, what's it called? Deepwater Horizon, and that. And still, there are stories coming out, but it all was rooted. The reason why that happened is rooted in the fact that they were trying to save money.
Yeah.
And therefore, the drive within the organisation was about cost cutting, and actually, the behaviour ultimately was about cost cutting. And obviously, that was a dramatic example, because that actually created, what happened. But then of course, the reputation of BP, or British Petroleum, as Barack Obama insisted on calling it, because he wanted to link it with the word Britain, it will be a generational issue. before that recovers.
So final question, if you see problems with reputation, that's a good warning sign that you've got a problem with the company spirit?
Well, the way I look at it is one of my 6 best-in-class company behaviours, which is normally the first warning sign is when the image and the experience doesn't match. So the image is essentially, in my language, is what are we saying to people, and the experience is how are we behaving, and if those two start to disconnect, then the customer sees it.
Who sees that first, the customer or the employees?
Well, actually, funny enough, normally the employees.
Yeah, if they listen to.
And you know, an example of, you know, you mentioned my advertising past, and it was in many ways great sorrow because of it was such a company full of esteem, and a brand and advertising of such full of esteem was VW. And that was the perfect example of what's happened over the last two years, where I'm sure some of those employees were thinking, this isn't right. You know, this goes against everything that we believe in. But there was the good old number. You know, we need to be number 1 in the world, or whatever their target was, and we need to be doing those things in order to do that. And suddenly, and those engineers who were probably involved in something that they felt very uneasy with, it blows up into something where actually the customers see this, and you think, well, that completely undermines everything I thought about VW.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how many billions of advertising pounds are then spent trying to restore it. It comes down to that very human activity, which is, do I believe what the company is saying?
Yeah.
Or not?